Okay, good morning. We're in Ayin Beis, volume 2, page 1199, close to the bottom. I'm discussing how to achieve a level of perception in the divine, in godliness, in the lakus. That's what he calls riyah. He made it clear, it doesn't mean riyah bosa, because today the only thing we see with what we call physical sight are physical objects, because we're physical human beings, we're limited. But first of all, it won't be that way. But today, there's a riyah sichlis, what he called the Ayin ha-seichel, because you could understand something and still not perceive it to the point that you literally see it. It's like seeing your beloved to the point that it affects you, that causes you to ache and long and crave for it, which of course is the goal we're trying to achieve here. His bonus that literally becomes so much part of you, so real to you. Because at the end of the day, I quoted a few times, just a very powerful language. I want to just read it inside. From the Mittler Rebbe, he talks about the Alter Rebbe, from Concentarted. One second. I think it's very appropriate here, very apropos. Which says like this. Right in the beginning of Concentarted, the Mittler Rebbe writes. I'm reading inside. He says, he talks about the Terose, the Torah of the Alter of Amur. My father, the Rebbe, meaning the Alter Rebbe, Mashakol Iker Magmose, Hoya Mitchilas Avedose Bekedish. His whole being, his whole like kavana intention, his whole being, from the beginning of his Aveda in his holy work, Avedose Bekedish, his work in Kedish, in his service. Ashaloi Pam V'Shtayim Shamaiti. That not once or twice that I heard from him many times. In other words, it's an expression in Hebrew. Pam V'Shtayim Shamaiti. Not once and not twice I heard from him. The Piruach Kotshe Zal Shekol Iker Magmose. He repeats it again. That his primary being, his whole being,
Megamosoi.
What?
Megamosoi.
Megamose. What's the root of that word?
Megama.
Being.
The tachlis, okay. The purpose.
Yeah. Shekol Iker Megamose. V'yigiyose b'mesiris nefesh mamish alanash. And look at these words. Yigiyose, his effort, his exertion, mesiris nefesh mamish. Mamish was mesiris nefesh alanash, al anshe shlemenu, meaning on the community, the Chabad community. Hey, what was it? Rak, only sheyukva benafsham, to instill, to permanently, how do you say yukva, to be keveya, to install in a permanent fashion, benafsham, in their spirit, gili alakus, revelation of the divine, the hainu, sheyi ispilus nafsham, explains what it means. That the excitement, there's this excitement of their spirit, of their soul, rak ispilus alakis. Their excitement should only be a godly excitement. Dafke. V'lo ispilus chaye bosar. And not excitement from the life of flesh. She'ena hispilus alakus klal, which is not at all the excitement of godliness, of alakus. V'zeh ikar v'kitzur teichen ha'mechuven. And then he goes on to say, well, he's going to explain this. So what do you see from this? What do we get excited by? Someone says to you something. What do we get excited by? So I'm not going to go spell out everybody's taivus and the things that excite you. But the Alter Rebbe's entire purpose was to instill in us and install in us and establish that we should get excited by godliness more than we get excited than by Chaye Basa, which is a big challenge. You know, go try to excite people who enjoy life, and they say, you know what, enjoying godliness is better than enjoying the life you think that you're enjoying. Why did I bring it? Because when you think about it, what's lying behind all of this? The Rebbe Rashab is elaborating at length. Chachma, Bina, and now we've entered the world of Daas. So besides the concept and the resonance that comes with that, and then the deep elaboration, the long, expansive elaboration of Bina, and you come to the Nekudas HaTamtzis, that you come to understand godliness, and you come to a summation that has even more clarity. And that brings it back to the resonating truths of the initial chokhmah, the initial concept. Now he says, then yai migdaite in this nekudas hatamtzis. My migdaite bezeh shenirgish etzlei etzem ha'inyan aleki, and that will cause him harihu ba libchinas koloyin. So I just felt, reading what the Mittler Rebbe writes, the Alter Rebbe's kavona, which of course the kavona of all of Chassidus, the Rebbe Rashab is actually implementing it here and teaching us that now when you immerse yourself in a form of Daas, as we discussed yesterday what Daas is from Tanya, his Chassidus, then you truly give birth to feelings that are solid, that are sustainable, not just Dimyein Shav as we learned from Tanya. And also earlier,
you write the exact source from the
One second. Please, I'm going to pause and then you'll ask your question. Write it down if you think you're going to forget it. I don't want to stop the flow here. That's the whole kavanah. So please, with all respect. So bottom line is that shenirgish etzlei etzem ha'inyan aleki, which in different words is almost what we just read from the Mittler Rebbe, Quintessay Spilus, right in the beginning, that it should become, the Spilus should be around godliness. And then he said, then we learned the ikad inyan hariyah de chachma. So in other words, the ikad, the primary riyah, is shaydeh hamokas hadas. So in other words, you could have riyah. Chachma is riyah. It's a form of resonating truth that's like seeing something. The Nekudas HaTamtzis has the behirus, as we learn, an illuminating clarity, a crystallization that comes at the end of the process. The chacham bebina, the chachma influences and imbues bina with that element of clarity. But he says the ikka, the primary riyah, is when there's hamokas hadas, like the intimacy we spoke about, that you connect to the idea. It's not just you could have a person who has a brilliant mind and can actually visualize elokus. You could have that, but it's not yet mine. Do you own it? Do you feel it means something to you? Like you say, and they explain it very well. It's like a very powerful philosopher who understands an idea really well, and it even has an impact on him. But it doesn't have them without the hamokas hadas, but nekudas hatamtzis. That's when you come to hakora be'etzem ha'inyan. You come to a recognition. I recognize this. This is mine. It's like I tell the story, the analogy, when Pavarotti and the old Jew, Pavarotti did a rendition of Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, and beautiful, like a real opera singer. And the whole audience gave him a standing ovation. Then an old Jew got up, and he said to Tehillim Chav Gimel, David Hashem Rei, like a Jew says it, and the whole place started crying. So Pavarotti asked the Jew, why when I did it, they all gave an ovation, standing ovation. When you did it, they cried. He says, because you may know the psalm, but I know the shepherd. So it's a lot different. Now I know this. This is my God. It's not just a gewaldige God that's bligvul and ein sof and beyond definition. It's mine. It's like my Father. It's my God. And I personally recognize it as if it's my own. And that changes the whole equation, because now it's part of who you are. Now we all still have a Yetzer Hara. We're going to have plenty of resistance, but Das adds into the equation that you're an intimate. When you read in the Psukim in Pasha Kisisa and earlier in Truma, when the Eibishter says, build the Aron, v'na'adati l'chashama, and I will meet you there. The word na'adati is an interesting word. It comes from Yud. Yud is marriage. Yud is intimacy. God says, I want to be intimate with you, and you want you to be intimate with me. Now, obviously, to remove any anthropomorphic elements, b'mafshit negashmiusam. We're not talking here in the physical, what we call intimacy physically, but the root of physical intimacy is connection. It's total dissolving one into another, where two people become one. Lebasar echad, like one. Or nekeva zacher bara esam, in the image of God, becoming one with God. And that is not just a concept. With all the chokhmah and the bina, it's all still in the cognitive. Daas turns it into an experience, a personal experience, which of course will give finally birth to the midas, the emotions. In this case, the feeling of longing. You can only long for something that you want. If someone says to you, God is great, and they give you a whole philosophical explanation, doesn't mean you're going to long for it. So he says the ikariya, and which ultimately will lead to the chelas ava, to the craving, to the kiloyin, kleis hanefesh, is through the hamokas hadas, become hakora be'etzem inyan. You recognize it, meaning it's like yours. It's like recognizing your child or recognizing your parent. It's not just that he understands the inyan. Eichoma means how and what. He doesn't just understand it, he recognizes it. When you recognition means that it's something that's yours, that you recognize, that you connect with. And this level of das comes dafke after the comprehension, to the point that you come to the nekudas hatamtzis, the summary point where it was all concluded. Now, why is that the case? Because remember, we're talking about levels in godliness that you can't see. Without contemplation, you don't know what you're talking about. First, you need to learn about it. First, you need to understand. And then you come to the point, now, this Erein Sof HaBligvul, Shamayim Mimal, Yichudei Law. Now, I'm going to personalize. I have a relationship with this Bligvul. And that's when I begin to long for it. I want to connect with it. I want to become one with it. Okay. Now, in the parentheses, he's going to qualify this, not in a negative way. He's going to qualify just to explain, well, where does this hakara come from? Is it come purely from our immersing ourselves, or do we have something in us that's already connected to God and the Das is revealing? We're going to discuss that in a moment, but I'll pause here if anybody wants to ask anything. This is where we reached yesterday, and I'm going to learn now the parentheses, the bottom of page 1199. Any questions or comments?
Is it possible for you to put down the Concentarted spirals from the Mittel Rebbe, the exact source?
Since this is a partnership, let somebody else find it and put it up there, because I can't be. I'm going to be very busy today. I probably forget. So it's a published work. It's not a secret manuscript. So if anybody can just look it up, it's right in the beginning there.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone wants to ask anything, or we go to the parentheses?
Concentarted spirals is a sefer latzmoi, right? It's not a part of a big sefer. In Rabbinat as Chaim.
It's its own sefer. There's a sefer Maimori, I'm sorry, called Kuntresim. It's in there as well. Okay.
Thank you.
Now he continues. Ube'emes, and in truth, this recognition, when you say I recognize it, it's mine. It's not like I said yesterday, you meet someone, you see someone, and someone who knows them tells you, this person you see, an excellent person, a godly person, a tzaddik. You're hearing about it, but you don't recognize it in him because you don't know the person. Then suddenly someone walks in who you know is a really righteous person. There's a recognition. Recognition is more than just knowing. So he says, "Ube'emes zeu mekayach ha'akara sheyesh be'etzem ha'nefesh ba'atzmo sein sof." In truth, this recognition comes from the power of recognition that's there in the core neshama, core nefesh, that we have a recognition atzmo sein sof. We're wired that way. We have it. It's like a child feels his parent, recognizes his parent. You see newborn children, young children, they see their mother, their father, they recognize them. Like we discussed earlier, Maimar Bereshis, that's page 1175, 1176 that I mentioned. It's on 1176. He says that. He says, I'm just looking for the exact lashon. He says, so there's ways to reach hakara through learning, but he says, etzem inyan hakara eina shayach b'zeh limud. Because real recognition is something that is a core connection. One second. So there's the learning part, which is Havana Vasaga, understanding. There he goes. Yediyah is more than just understanding; it's a deeper recognition. But then he goes on and says like this. He brings the Tanya in minute. So you may recall the bottom of page 1176, we discussed this. Because now you can see him 1 second, he seems to contradict himself. You just said that Daas seems to be a third step in a process after Chachma Bina. Fine, Daas is not purely understanding, Daas is recognizing, feeling, experiencing, personalizing. But it's a process, like we said, it's Meichin of Chabad, Chachma Bina Daas. Is it Meichin coming through an intellectual process, or is it because we recognize, like you recognize your mother or your father, which doesn't require any deep concentration? So let's read the parentheses and we'll see how the Rebbe Rashab addresses that. So he says, "Be'emes, this comes from the Koyach HaKara and Etzem HaNefesh Ba'atzmus Ein Sof." Ba'atzmus Ein Sof, like explained in Bereshis. Shemezeu gam ken HaKara Sichlis. From this also comes HaKara Sichlis, a cognitive recognition. And that's why it's higher than just comprehending of Bina. But it comes only after you have a comprehension of Bina through immersing, through delving deeply into the summation of what the Hasaga was. So what is he saying here? So if you go back to the Maimer there, I remember elaborating on it, what he's saying here is there's two things going on. It's true, in truth, true recognition comes because there's a connection. You know, we are created b'tzelem Elokim. The Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, Metechiyusei, right? Vayipach ba'apav nishmes chayim, vayipach nefich metechiyusei. Meaning there's a fundamental core connection between a neshama, nefesh alikis, and its source. It's not just like God created a tree. A tree is a creation of God's, but it's not a child of God's. We're b'ni b'ched Yisrael, like he speaks there, like the Av and Ben, like God is our father. There's a fundamental connection. We have something that's similar to godliness. So though everything was created by God and everything has godly energy and godly expression, but it's not like quite like a soul, like a neshama. So that means that there's a fundamental connection. But how do you get to that connection? So it's true, like he speaks in Perek Yud Ches and Yutes, that when push comes to shove and there's a real gzeida, you suddenly see. Like you don't always see the love of someone to another until there's a crisis. But how do you get to it without a crisis? So the process that Chassidus teaches us is that you get through it through a process of contemplation. In other words, embedded in you is that recognition, but you're not conscious of it. The goal is that you should be conscious of it and should become part of who you are. Like the Gemara does say, you can be connected to God and still defy what God wants. But to be a person who's consumed with and completely subsumed with connecting to godliness, so the Hakara, the Etzem, comes from the connection. But how do you get to it? You get to it through the intellectual cognitive process of contemplating. That's why we daven. That's why we think about godliness, his bonus. If there's just a connection, what do we need as bonus first where do we need it all together? So there's two reasons essentially. One is, first of all, to get it, we should become conscious of it. Another, it should be sustained within us. It should be internalized. Not just a fundamental, not just a connection, but something that is burning inside of us all the time, that you feel it and you're conscious and aware and so on. So that's what he says. That he says, "Be'emes," it comes from inside the nefesh. And that is the root where Hakara Sichlis comes from. But the process to get there, so that's why Hakara is actually higher than Seichel, because it's not purely understanding. But the process to get there, Shabbat, B'Seichel, in order for it to get into our intelligence, in other words, to permeate us in that way, it comes, and the process comes at the end. Das comes after comprehension, after the details, after the Nekudas HaTamtzis. We have summed it up. You have intellectual clarity in the subject, and now comes together with that comes the deep you delve, immerse yourself, and then you get that recognition. So the recognition really comes because there's a deeper connection, but in practical, you get it through the process of intellectual process. You could probably also say, because someone could ask a hypothetical question. Let's say you didn't have this the hakara be'etzem nefesh and atzmus ein sof. Can someone who does not have, it's a hypothetical question, someone who does not have an etzem connection, can they intellectually, after chachma bina, come to a das of real hakara? Based on this parenthesis, I would say partially yes, but maybe not completely. In other words, we may have an emotional recognition and personal recognition of our parent, but you may not appreciate who your parent is. And it could remain stagnant, or not stagnant, it could remain dormant within you for many years. But then you come to learn about your parent. You start studying and start learning and hearing. Say, wow, that's my parent. And then now I appreciate them also on my terms, with my seichel. Then what will happen is that recognition that fundamentally a child has to its parent will come alive in a very different way. So I would say with Das, you could get to it to some way, because look, you could always immerse yourself in something to the point you say, this is connected with me. But if you actually are connected to it, like in this case, the nefesh is connected to Atzmus Ein Sof, there's a Hakara Atzmis, like a child to a parent, then obviously the Hakara is a whole different level. Now, he doesn't say all that I just spelled out. It just, as I'm thinking about it, it seems like you need to say something of that nature. So you probably can come to some Das, but in Tanya, interestingly, he doesn't say that Das is a result of a Hakara Atzmis of a nefesh. There he says it's a result of Hamokas Hadas, of immersion. Because at the end of the day, when, let's say, a husband and wife are intimate, it's they're intimate not because they married. They don't have a fundamental connection before they were married. They didn't even know each other. And yet they are able to come to a process of a relationship where they recognize and they come. But you could also say they were soulmates. They were soulmates that they were not aware of their lives. Now they've connected. Then they come to a point of Das, and it reveals the fundamental soulmate connection that they always really had and were not aware of.
Even their body was one. Hashem divided the body.
Yeah, well, the question is if that's the case with all human beings or only Adam and Chava. But okay, I hear. Good. Okay, so that's the parentheses. Anybody wants to ask anything?
No, but you said about somebody that did not have the akor be'etzem, if he could get it with through chokhmah ubina and das.
Well, in Tanya, it doesn't seem like he says that you need to have that etzem nefesh. He doesn't mention it. He just says from chokhmah bina you come to das. So you could say the Alter Rebbe doesn't spell everything out, and when you start explaining you need it. You could also say that maybe later in Tanya when he talks about Ava Musuteres, that comes into play. I just brought it up because I don't see anything definitive. So I just wanted to say a few words about it because I'm sure you're thinking about it yourself. Okay. Does anybody have any other one second. This is not just
is not having it be'etzem.
Right.
If you could get to that, to this idea.
So I said, to a certain extent, yes, I would say. And you know what? A goy also was created by God and also has a nefesh. He also has Tselem Elokim. So you could argue that he has me'ein zeh. Okay, but anybody has any other questions on this topic, or should I continue?
Is this al derech the two types of emunah in V'ata Tetzava?
He doesn't use Amunah here, so I would not bring Amunah here. He's bringing Das.
But say it's something that comes from the etzem,
But see, he doesn't use Amunah here. So that's why here he's talking more of a recognition. That's that does he mean that etzem hanefesh ba'atzmus ein sof is a munah? I don't know. Since he doesn't bring a munah, and we know that he wants to talk about v'yedaita hayom and chochma bina daas, maybe there's some similarities. If you can learn from them, fine. But I wouldn't make a direct connection. The explanation there, maybe you can help explain what it says here. But I wouldn't call this level a munah because he didn't say the munah. He said akarit. So maybe it's connected, maybe not. Okay. Continuing on. After the parentheses, the last line on the page. And through this recognition, he can then arrive afterwards to seeing the very personality with the Ayin HaSeichel. It's Ayin HaSeichel. It's not Einei Basar, he said, Mamish. But with the Ayin HaSeichel, you come to not just understanding something, but like he said, you're recognizing. Recognition is a visual. You recognize it as if it's part of who you are. So recognition doesn't always mean you have to see someone's actual face. You know, you could sense, in a way, the reality of something that relates to you, like in a visual. Even if you don't have physical vision, you can have cognitive vision, as we explained at length through this whole discussion. So it's much more than Chochmah and Bina as the Hasaga and Yediyah in knowledge. Now we're talking about actually a form of visual connection, as if you're visualizing and recognizing it. You recognize it. Well, he doesn't say the word hisamtus here, but it's like real to you, as if it's something you see.
Re'iyas hamahus.
That's what he says. Yeah. When you do this process, and the parentheses, you're also talking about something that you're fundamentally connected with, and you go through a real rigorous hisbanunus that goes with chachma and bina and das, and you're patient, and you're not rushing it. Yeah, he says you can come to a riyas hamahus. Obviously, it's not the fullest thing like la'asid lave, but relative to each one of us, we can come to a recognition of it. Look, when you learn Chassidus and you learn about dargis, the levels like lifnei tzimtzum, we all know we're not on that level. We're not before the tzimtzum, and we're not in bligvul, but it resonates. When you learn about it, it resonates the transcendent elements of it. You know, it resonates that there's a truth that's beyond us. So you can learn about it conceptually, but there can be a point where you actually resonates and you recognize the truth of it. That's not something that is completely impossible to arrive at. The thing is, you have got to work on it, because it very easily can just also disappear. But you recognize it to the point where you become like one with it. Like when the Rebbe Rashab cried as a child, why God doesn't reveal himself. So you could say, yes, it's the Rebbe Rashab, butzim mekat v'yediyah. A child like the Rebbe would know that. But still, the Rebbe speaks in Sichos that every one of us can come to a point where you can even cry. You can cry about something that's completely beyond us. It may not be you, and it may not be that you're doing that 24/7, but everybody has had a moment of truth where you sense something that's beyond you, and you sense it's so real that it makes you cry. Now, what do you cry? Not because you're lacking it only. The very truth of it can make you cry. So my point is that when you apply this, as I said, I'm going to reserve discussing how we apply this till after he finishes the subject, because I don't want to do it in the middle for obvious reasons, because I want to see the whole topic. But since we're mentioning it, we could achieve this level, again, commensurate and proportionate to who you are. No one's asking you to be somebody else. It's like, b'chol ma'od cha. You're ma'od. You're everything beyond where you've achieved till now. So there's comprehending something and owning it, and then there's crying over it, which means like it's so awesome and so awe-inspiring and such a reality that compared to everything else, you say, wow, you know, this is like beyond, and you actually have an emotional reaction. Now, I'm not going to say every emotional reaction is due to Daas. We know we also have Demyein Shav. You could have emotional reaction, it doesn't last very long. But if you work on it, he says you can achieve this level. For who? And now he continues. Here's how you do it. For who? Sha'ayidei ashkida. Through the effort. Shkida's effort is continuous, relentless effort. V'riboy yegiyah. He's literally answering the question we just asked. How do you get to this place? So top of page 1200 now. Just finished 1199 to 1200. We moved to page 1200 finally. So again, through shkida, effort, v'riboy yegiyah. Not just yegiyah, exertion, but riboy yegiyah, much exertion. Be'eze inyan eliki. In any divine matter, v'asaga teva, with a good understanding, a solid understanding. Ubechol eis, hu boal nakuda atamtsis, min asaga. And every moment, it's interesting, ubechol eis, wow, that's a strong statement, that every moment he comes to the summation. In other words, he doesn't remain in this being a state of understanding many details. He's constantly bringing it to its punchline. Because as I said earlier, you can learn about whole Seder Shtalshus and not know what the punchline is. So he's bringing it to Nekudas Atamtsis, Min HaSaga, from the comprehension. V'tekeya daite bezeh. And he, tekeya means he immerses, he invests himself, his Daas, his concentration, his Daas.
Not only invest, it's a stronger expression than invest. Tekeya. It's like you are putting it a permanent way.
B'chezek b'hamokas hadas, b'chezek with an intensity, with a strength. B'hamokas hadas with an immersion, a in-depth immersion of das. Ad shebali de'akara, to the point that he comes to a state of recognition. When a person does that, the Rebbe Rashab now sums that up and says, when you do that, that to the point you came to recognition through all this, he makes it clear. It's not come easily. Effort, great exertion, summary, and then the das to the point of total immersion in it, to the point you come to recognition. He says, Hine b'meshech zman. When you do that, in time, a matter of time, b'meshech zman, over time, shemayim igdaite ba'akoris inyan, that he immerses himself with his das in recognizing this truth. He's capable of coming to his samtus, that this becomes real to him. Said Chaye Basar, matters of the flesh are real to us. So the hisamtus here clearly is obviously the highest, the level that he hasn't yet mentioned. In other words, you need to continue doing this. And b'meshech zman, in other words, it's not going to happen overnight. In time, over time, person continues doing this, he can come to a state of hisamtus. By hisamtus zois, eine hisamtus aseichel. Hisamtus zois is not just the resonance of a true idea, that you feel is true. We spoke about that already. We're talking now the hisamtus of das more than the hisamtus of seichel. Ki'im hisamtus ha'inyan hainu ha'emes va'etzem shel ha'inyan. So in other words, it's not just you sense that it's a correct equation, that the idea is a true idea, but that the very subject matter, not the concept, but the thing itself is real. In other words, you can come away and saying, God is unbelievable. And what's unbelievable? You came to an understanding of what godliness is. But that's still a conceptual resonance. He says here the resonance is in the etzem inyan, etzem shala inyan. Not just the idea of it, the concept of it, but the actual experience, the actual thing is real to you. Godliness is real to you. Not just the idea of godliness. It's like some philosophers that said, the idea of God is a very good idea. But then there's experiencing it like, no, it's a God that actually exists in your life. So he continues now. He says, the samtus haseichel, the resonance of intelligence, of cognitive resonance, who gam ken gili harbe yeser gam hakoros ha'inyan. Even that is also an achievement. Remember, you could understand something and not feel a resonating truth. Is samtus. So that's also a gili harbi yeser gama kodesh ha'inyan, which also comes from the recognition of the idea. So it's an achievement. He's not dismissing it. The kishem she'ena demi yediyas ha'inyan she'adei ha'sogli yediyas ha'inyan she'adei ha'kodesh. Just like we know that you cannot compare the awareness, the perception of something through understanding it, to the perception that when you start recognizing it, meaning it's yours, you recognize it in a direct way, like he said. So it's a deeper achievement than just recognizing than knowing it through understanding. Shegilui ha'inyan va'er ba'akora hu harbi yesem ha'gilui sheba'asogeh. Because the revelation of an idea and the oir and the energy that it generates in hakara, in recognition that you recognize it's your father, you recognize it's your God, not just you know it. He says, "Hu harbi yesem ha'gilui sheba'asogeh." That's far greater than the revelation that comes through understanding something well, because now you're recognizing it as a recognition, a personal recognition. So he says, just as it is in seichel yisamtus, that the hakara in seichel is deeper than the hasaga of seichel. The hakara yediyah is deeper than the hakara, and the hakara in the yediyah through hakara is deeper than the yediyah through hasaga. Kamoi kain be yisamtus haseichel. Same thing he's going to say now. There's a higher level of isamtus that's even higher than the cognitive. That when he has that resonating cognitive resonance, that this idea is like true. It's resonating true that it's so and so. 1 second. Oh, he's just repeating what he said. So this is a gili harbi yeser ma'akarish shazo be'etzem ha'dover yeser. This is a greater gili because I'm not sure the ma'akarish shazo be'etzem ha'dover yeser. But now he's going to
talking
say
here about two things, about his amtus and about hakore. Two different things.
Rab Shlomo, we made a decision that let me explain it because people are getting distracted and they get confused. So I'm middle of explaining and I'll stop and then you can add whatever you'd like to add, okay? If you and I were learning alone, it'd be fine, but we're not. Okay. And I appreciate your passion, but I think sometimes we need to just limit it because people want to hear the whole topic. So I'm going to try to present it and I'm learning it. So I'm teaching it. So give me a few minutes and then if you have something to add, by all means. Okay. Okay. There's a few things that need to be dissected here. There's a few things. Remember, he said there's hasaga, understanding, there's hakara, recognition, and there's hisamtus, where it becomes real and true to you. He made it clear that the hisamtus comes only after a lot of effort and yigia and exertion. And b'meshech zman, you can come to a level of hisamtus that it's as real to you as anything is real. So he says now, in addition, in hisamtus itself, there's two levels. So we have 4 levels here: understanding, recognizing, resonating truth of seichel, and a resonating truth of the thing itself. So he's saying like this. So just as, so the isamtus zeis, he says, is not just in seichel. This is the 4th level. It's the isamtus in the thing itself. God is true, not just the idea of God. So now he goes back and says, just as hisamtus, just like hisamtus of seichel, level 3, the seichel of the resonating truth of the idea is greater than the recognition. And that recognition also is greater than no understanding. So he's making like comparisons like this. Just like recognition is greater than just understanding the idea, because it's yours. It's like your father. And hisamtus in seichel is greater than the recognition, so too, and far more so, is the recognition of the thing itself is greater than not the recognition. The hisamtus, the truth of the thing itself, is greater than the truth of the seichel of the thing. He's just saying it in step by step. So that's how we have to understand this. So let me read it inside now. So he started. Okay, you come, and b'meshech zman, you come to a certain resonating truth. Hisamtus, it's real. Not just it's recognized, it's real. The hisamtus is not just the reality of the truth of an idea. Like hergish amiti sadover. You recognize and you feel the truth of the idea. But it's a samtus in the thing itself. God is real, not the idea of God. Okay. So he says, his samtus aseichel is also more than hakaras ha'inyan. The samtus level 3 is greater than level 2. Just like hakara is eina dema yedias ha'inyan through hasaga can be compared to hakara. Kamay can be samtus aseichel, that the seichel level 3, this seichel recognizing the truth, the idea, hazagila harbi yesem hakara, is greater than just recognition, which is level 2. So too, how much more so? So much more infinitely distant. Is the truth of the thing itself. The truth of the matter. The emeskite from the inyan, not the emeskite from the truth of the idea, but of the inyan itself. That's the leg from seichel, the hanocha, that type of absolute conviction and leg that you know this as a fact. The core divine element here, that's much higher than the level of hakara, of recognition.
You're translating hisamtus as the resonating truth. Is it? I'm trying to understand the word because it's used so much here. It's so critical. Is it like realization of the truth?
You could say that too, yeah. Okay. Look, when we're talking about, as I said, let's think about our lives. When someone says, what is real to you? Most people will identify things that are empirically experienced on a daily basis, on an ongoing basis. What's real to me? My life, my health, my family, my work, because we are physical entities, and what is real to us is the reality of our existence. If someone says, what about God? So yeah, a person of faith is going to say God is real. But let's be honest, is God as real to us as our immediate life situation? Do we lose sleep over Mashiach and godliness not being revealed in this world? We lose sleep when we're sick, when we are tired, when we're hungry, when we're in pain. So my point is, that's why I read from the Concentarted, Torah and Chassidus is coming to transform that we should be that godliness should be as real to us as the realities around us. That's why Riyah is so important here, because seeing is believing. Someone say, yes, show me God and I'll believe. That's what people say. So obviously the answer is God is beyond vision, etc., etc. But there's something about seeing something and experiencing with your senses that is very real to us. The Rebbe Rashab, as all of Chassidus, is training us. How can you train yourself to perceive godliness with the same reality as you perceive your physical life? So there's a process. Yes, you could say we're wired deep in our etzem nefesh, there's a connection, but we're not conscious of it. And the proof is very simple. Godliness is not as real to us as other things. You need to be reminded that Shabbos is coming. You don't feel it. When you're hungry, you feel it very well. You don't need to look into a calendar to know that you have to eat breakfast or lunch or dinner. You need to look at a calendar to know when is Shabbos. You don't feel it in the air. So elikus is not bepshitus. Elikus is b'schachus. Elimus is bepshitus. the language he used earliest. World is a real, God is a novelty. Now that doesn't mean you don't believe it. It just, so how do you make it a mamoshes, a reality, a true reality? So the Rebbe, so going through the process, it's a contemplation. You're thinking about, we talked before about seeing the godly power in nature, in existence. That yesh Ayin, this the perpetuation of the celestial bodies, etc. But now he's talking about understanding God beyond, not related to any particular entity. So you contemplate again and again. You begin with a idea, let's say the idea of Ein Sof, Chachma, goes into Bina. There's something that resonates right in the beginning, something true about it, but it's not yet fully blown. Bina, Hasaga comprehends it in detail. You come to the summation because you don't want to get lost in the woods. You need to be focused, come to the summation. You then immerse yourself with Daas, Iskashus, that it relates to me. You connect it intimately. In that itself, you come to Hakara, recognition, that's Das, Hakara V'Hargosha. You feel it, you recognize it. Now it's become something, not just a novelty, you recognize it now, you recognize it. But it's still not that full reality as the Samtus of Olam Hazeh. So he says, in time, if you keep this process going and you train yourself, you will acclimate yourself to starting to experience God as a reality. And then he's going, not just the concept of God, in the seichel part, which is where it began. It began that it made sense. Ein Sof makes sense when you start thinking about it. And it resonates even in a certain way. But now he's coming to not just that you recognize the truth of the idea, but you also recognize the truth of the very existence of it. And it becomes like a reality. Ein Sof is right here. The infinite power of the divine is right side of me, and I feel it, and I experience it almost or as if I experience the material world, which was the beginning of the process, was so natural to me. So it's like all of that is the Samtus. It's very, it's not just resonance. It's like almost like a natural, becomes a natural fact and truth within you. And that, he says, is far greater than the Samtus, the Hakara and the Samtus of Seichel. I'm going to stop here. It's the middle of a sentence, but we'll reread this because it needs more explanations already, and time is of essence here. But if anybody, I hope that was helpful. If anybody has any questions, please.
It was extremely helpful. It's a very difficult word to translate in this context or in any context. Modern Hebrew doesn't really translate it very well at all.
I agree, because it's not just a word, it's an experience. It's a whole, we're talking about an evolved state of consciousness, really. That's really what he's talking about here. But this is not uncommon in Chassidus, that a word can be a whole chapter. Hisamtus in this context is a whole chapter. It's not just a word.
Correct. Thank you.
Did you read inside in the Concentarted Spilus?
Yes, I did.
Where did you read? What page were you reading?
The act opening, the first, the beginning. It starts with there. Literally the first. Hine Pasach Dov Yoyer v'Chiluki Eklolis shebein Divrei Elchim Chaim Yeshenim. First lines.
Okay, and that page Aleph?
In my book, it's a book that most people don't have. It's I don't know if it's page Aleph. It's just the first. Is there a beginning?
I don't know. I'm looking on the library, and apparently there's a Hakdama.
It looks like chapter 1.
There's Hakdama Mikuntrus Spilus, and then there's
chapter 1, the beginning of chapter 1.
Okay.
Rabbi Weingarten, can you post that, please?
Okay,
I am as soon as I find it.
Unless somebody has a question on what we learned, I'm going to stop right now. We'll stop here, middle of, we're the first third of page 1200. Middle of the idea of his Hakara and his Samtus. Okay, we'll stop here. Anybody want to say anything? I will explain tomorrow the difference between the samtus of seichel and the samtus of the inyan itself. That needs more explanation. But just to give you a little, what's a taste of it, it would be, I mean, since we're talking about intimacy, imagine someone who reads about it and understands it, but never experiences it. So they can know the truth of an idea, but ein chacham kabal nesayin. There's something true about godliness that becomes an experience than just the concept of it. That's the key thing to remember in this last highest level. But we'll talk about this more tomorrow.
Yeah, I was just having a hard time finding it in the Chabad library one, but the Contrast Spilus is there.
Why don't you look at my Mori Admuram Tsai Kuntresim in there? It's printed in there.
That's where it's from. I'm saying this is what it is. Yeah, I'm just whatever. Okay.
Is there a Kuntresim Spilus there?
There is a Contrast Spilus there. I'm just having a hard time finding the page where it is. It's where it discusses it.
So I should be getting as excited about connecting with the Rashbi and Chassidus tonight as I am about my barbecue. Is that what you're saying, Rabbi Jacobson?
Well, I didn't want to say that because then I think you may never come back to this class. It may frighten you off. So far so good. Chassidus hasn't threatened your barbecue.
The only thing is the reality.
What are you serving? What are you serving? I'm getting excited.
The weather is the only thing that could destroy the barbecue.
I'll tell you one thing: weather does not impact on the emes of Elikuz. That I can tell.
That's the right answer. That's what I answered. Somebody's coming, and he said, "Is you gonna still have it if it's gonna rain?" And I said, "Rain or shine, the Rashbi is always shining. We're of course gonna have it."
Yeah, with a hot dog or no hot dog.
The Rashbi is the one that walked down the Gershom.
Okay, go ahead. What did you about Geshem? The Rashbi? What were you saying?
There was no rain.
He said Torah and Hini Matova Manoim Shavas Achim Gam Yachad, and it started to rain.
Right. So interesting. Okay. I was learning this morning that one of the things that we say about Lag Bomer is that the sages their death, they stopped dying, and Lag Bomer that was celibate. Yet this rabbi was saying in this Shiur that the opposite is true. Is we are celebrating, really the Rebbe is emphasizing we're celebrating the histalkus of the Rashbi much more than the ceasing of the histalkus of the Chachamim. It's sort of like the opposites in together in a way.
Well, you know why? Because they died out of Loinagu Kovet Zebezeh. And Rashbi said, B'chad Katir is Katarna. His passing was Mrs. Neshikin. It was meaning because he's being bound and connected to Ein Sof.
It was not on the same year.
It was
the Rashbi was not, I think it was not on the same year.
It was not the same year. No, the Rashbi survived the plague. 5 Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva did not die because they did not have this issue.
Right, so he had that obviously that his hamtus that we're talking about in his spalus and the hair gasha and the
I would say he did a good job. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna try to get that tonight. Yeah, tonight even over the.
Tonight the program begins at 8. There's a children's program I think at 7. I am going to become the MC around 11:30. I'm not sure exactly when, and I'm gonna. There's going to be the first part, a lot of music. I'm going to be the Sefer Torah, talking about Torah, Rashbi, etc., etc.
What tonight are the Hatzalathon? You mean?
Yeah,
it's going to be. You're going to come on at 11.
11:30. I mean, depending how things run, but around There's going to be a lot of music in the beginning. They're doing a lot of concerts. They have all these stars.
Stars, that's good.
There's going to be music later too, but around 11:30.
The oil. Is it
everywhere, wherever you want. Look up on Hatzalathon. Someone has to give Rav Shlomo training how you find things online.
What's the name of it? What's the name?
Hatzalathon. Just go to COL Live.
Just check your text messages. You got links from everywhere.
Every 3 minutes, another text message comes.
But isn't it amazing that millions of people will be celebrating the stalkos of a tzaddik that lived 2,000 years ago? It's unbelievable. I always am flabbergasted, even more than Moshe Rabbeinu, Zion Adar. This is incredible. This is unique. There's nothing like it in the world, even in the Jewish world.
So I always have a hard time
So
explaining.
a second, is that a level, Rabbi Eliezer, is that a level of hasaga, hakara, or isamtus?
Well, tonight I hope to have Yisam because I'm gonna learn right now. I'm gonna not work so much today. I'm gonna learn about the Rashbi and Lag Bomer.
Isamtus ha-seichel or isamtus ha-inyan?
Well, tonight
Right,
with a good piece of steak, Rabbi Teitel, we'll certainly have Yisam of an Inyan. But
You'll have a samtus of the para that gave you that piece of meat.
okay, guys, really have a freilichen Lag
Eliezer,
Bomer.
it's gonna keep
I
you
don't want to see you
grounded.
looking like a
I want to
cow.
ask you guys one question before we go. Do you really feel, does the skeptic in you really believe it's possible that we can have a lakuz be as real to us as our physical kashmirs?
I was just going to ask you, Rabbi. It seems almost like the level of a tzaddik. To be honest with you, it's a tzaddik telling us where he's at, and it's frustrating. I mean, I'll just speak for myself personally.
That's what I'm asking. What do you guys think?
The Rabbi is saying clearly that everyone is a tzaddik, and he's talking about these levels, that it shaykhs to everyone.
Yeah,
I asked the skeptic in you. Understands that?
I feel that it's possible. Who was it? The Berditchever that said Hashem sort of like played a trick on us. He put Elokus in a book and Klippa in the reality, in real life. And that if you want, was that the Berditchever?
He said to Hashem, what do you make a kunz? You put Elam Haza in reality, and you wrote about Elam Haba in a book. Try to put Elam Haba in reality. And Elam Haza, you'll see how they behave.
Right. So that would be, to me, I think that you really would, the skeptic I would answer the skeptic by saying that if you really bind yourself and learn Chassidus all day, and you learn the book, if you dwell in godliness, which right now, unfortunately, but the Hisamtus is found in Chassidus, in a book, and he's Sefer Spalis and Ayin Beis. If you really made that your whole day, yes, I think you could actually make it even in Bezman Azeh. You could live Mashiach-dik and Geulah-dik at that level. But if you're going to deal with the reality in the world on a regular basis, in the physical thing, you would have to be incredibly makusher to be able to maintain that throughout your day.
Saying,
Eliezer, the Rabbi is saying clearly that Bizman Hazeh, you have to go in the world, and this is the Tachlis HaAveda. And you have the Isamtus, I don't know, but in the world.
I know we have to be in the world, but I'm answering you that for me, I think it's except for, as Yitzhak said, except for rare individuals, which I'm certainly not, that they could be in Times Square or go visiting somebody on the subway, a gavir on the subway, and still be his elokus b'pshitas, right? You'd have to be an incredible level. You could do it. You should strive for it. But in reality, to accomplish it, I'm certainly not, unfortunately, at that level. I got to be realistic.
Eliezer, you are doing it in reality. You are in Times Square. You don't have the same feeling like somebody that did not learn Chassidus. You have the feeling of Elokus when you are in Times Square.
I agree with you 100%, but it's still not at the level of that. When I look at the billboards or the streets or going to an office building over there, I'm still seeing an elevator. I'm not seeing godliness.
Your neshama sees it. The neshama could feel it. The body.
So why are you talking about him? Why don't you tell us? Why are you talking about Eliezer? Tell us, Rab Shlomo, what do you see?
I feel my neshama probably.
I'm just looking at you,
my
Simon,
body.
and I see a dogma chaya.
I'm your example. Oh boy, you're vested in all of me.
But
Reb Shlomo sees your neshama, not your body. He understands the neshamas.
Yeah. What's the new with the computer? Anything?
Naftali, you're another dogma chaya. We're talking about the goof.
Probably a dugme botachaya.
Very good, very good.
Oh gosh. But you know, I think if you look into the bonfire tonight and you really look into it, might be able to see it in the bonfire.
Yeah, like marshmallows or the hot dog?
I look forward to Log Bomer all year. I really try to get as high as I can. Tonight is one of those nights. And somebody said to me, even if it's going to rain, I tell them that of all the bonfires I've ever gone to, the one I remember the most was during a downpour. But which was interesting, right? So I said we pray for good weather tonight, but if it rains, it'll be a memorable one. Even the downpour of Gashmias, Rabbi Taitel, we gotta, as you say, have elokus with pshitas.
Shkoyach Eliezer, your excitement and energy is infectious.
Well, thank God. I'm preparing all day for it. So I've got all the Tiveris Menachem weddings, all the guys that just got married in our program, Rabbi Jacobson, all the other guys, 9 couples, they're coming over for to experience the joy of the Rashbi, Mirza Hashem.
Amazing. Wow.
Amazing. Shkoyach.
9 couples. How's that? Isn't that amazing? Baruch Hashem.
Look, I think when you learn Chassidus, like we're learning now, and you farbring, and there's Achdus, you get a taste of Elikus. And that ultimately, like he says, it needs time. You're not just like exercise. You can't expect to exercise one day and build your muscles up. To build your spiritual and divine muscles, if you have a sustaining effort of learning Chassidus, of Avos Yisrael, of doing Torah Veidim Mils Chasadim, it trains you to become a godly person. I think that's really what it is. It's not just the novelty of we ran the marathon and we win. It's a life change, that your life is immersed in divine things. And will you always feel it? Maybe not, but you always act on it. You always believe in it. And you keep, you're a soldier in the army. You're a soldier in a divine army. And that's really what it comes down to. That's how I see it. You forget about thinking about yourself. To me, that's already elikus.
I have to say, and I think I speak for everybody, Rabbi Jacobson, is that starting a day with Ayin Beis over all these years has really made it much more of a reality for me, and I'm sure everybody else agrees. So we give a yesha koyach to you and teaching Ayin Beis and taking all your time and everything. It really has changed my perspective on life.
100%. Yeah, I would second that motion. I've only been here a short period of time. What is 3-4 months, but it's been completely transformative. So thank you.
I can't tell you how many times, Yitzhak, that of the 8 years, I think it's been 8 years, and I joined right after, right in the beginning there, not the first day, but a little later, was that, there were so many days that I'd come home from Rabbi Jacobson's Shiur and Ayin Beis, and I wouldn't want to work the whole day. I just want to think about and try to make, Chassidus and the godliness my reality that day, rather than go out into the thing. But Rabbi Taitel,
I get it. I've never had more books of Chassidus on my kitchen table than in the past 4 months. I'm looking at my kitchen table now. I've got 10 books of Chassidus on my table.
Beautiful, and that should be transforming the gashmis of your table, your dining room table for the food.
Look, so what you're saying, and I appreciate what you're saying, but what you're saying is exactly that. When you immerse yourself in the waters of Chassidus, at least for that moment, you are experiencing reality that is as geschmack, if not geschmack, than a good barbecue. Let's be honest.
No question about it. No question about it. The trick is to maintain it.
Right, and integrate it into the barbecue. That's the challenge.
100%.
We want to hear I'd love to hear from Rabbi Tzvi Lang. Has something to say about this, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the barbecue.
He's always reminding us.
A good one, Tzvi. Tzvi, come
Barbecue
on.
of the books.
People know Tzvi is the real tzaddik nister. He talks about barbecue a herahin. He wants to learn Chassidus all day. I guarantee you, if you had to choose between a barbecue and learning Ayin Beis all day, he would for sure choose Ayin Beis. Am I right?
Sure, I don't have that big of a stomach these days, but you know.
I mean, so you remind me a little of Shmuel Munkus.
You remind me of Philip Namenworth. He's a guy, singer, songwriter I know. When I met him, he was an avid Buddhist. What is that? Anyway, you got to hear this. Very funny. I know any of you met Philip Namenworth?
No, don't know him.
So when I met him, he was a real Buddhist, but he was very spiritual. He's a Gewaldiker Jew. Learned Chassidus, Nigla, Parsha, you name it. He's excellent. Anyway, so I remember he told me that he was so taken by Buddhism, he went to India to become a Swami or something. Now, you have to go through a whole series of tests or whatever, but you also have to get into the lotus position, to be able to become that thing. And he says, so what did God do? He says, he pulled a trick on me. He gave me hemorrhoids. And that morning when I had to get into the lotus position, with the feet under you, I couldn't do it. It's too much pain. And then he came back the next day and it would not go away. He says, it only went away when I left India and I never finished. So he gave a talk. I asked him to talk about it. He said that even hemorrhoids has a divine purpose. So what do you think about that?
What about you? Yecheskel, are you on? No? Okay. But truthfully, Tzvi, you've always wanted to know about Atzmas. All the years I've known that you've always trying to get to the Etzem.
He doesn't want Gan Eden, he doesn't want Elam, only Atzmas.
He's always wanted to get to Atzmas. And I keep telling him, this is the closest I think a person I've ever gotten.
I think it's talking about that. Sorry, Naphtali. I think it's hard to
verbring. I get
verbring.
is the Atzimus of a rib steak.
I think it's hard to verbring on YouTube Live.
Yeah, it's true. It's not on YouTube Live anymore. It's only us now.
It seems like we're trying to get as close to Atmos as we can here in Ayin Beis. No, isn't this about as close as we're going to learn it?
There's on the screen still live on YouTube.
It does?
Yeah.